All right, welcome back, everybody, to Beyond Compliance. My name is Jim Albright, and I'm excited to have you all here to discuss some of the more challenging issues facing the process manufacturing industry today, and of course, to get some expert advice on how to overcome them. Now, for those of you who are new to the series, Beyond Compliance was started years ago to bring insights from industry leaders in QA, safety, compliance operations, business strategy, and share best practices on how to consistently and efficiently deliver quality products to your customers. So this twice monthly series is brought to you by Safety Chain. It's the first-in-kind plant management platform purpose-built to unite plant production, quality, and compliance together to help process manufacturers improve yield, maximize productivity, and ensure compliance. Now, before we get started, I do have a quick note just to let you know that we've muted all attending mics during the presentation, but of course, as always, you can submit your comments and questions at any time during the session because we're leaving room at the end for Q&A. And if we happen to run out of time and your question didn't get answered, don't worry, we absolutely will follow up with you after the webinar. And of course, as always, you will get the recording of today's session as well as the slides. So I am really excited to have with us today Sara Perrin, who I did actually see present earlier this year on a topic on EH&S, which honestly was one of the best at that event and got everybody talking. So Sara, I'm really grateful to have you share your expertise with us today, but you've had a lot of roles in engineering operations, obviously environmental health and safety. So would you mind sharing a little bit about your background before we jump into today's session?
Hello, as Jim said, my name is Sara. I'm a continuous improvement coach with Safety Chain, but I come from industry, and I've got some of my roles listed here, but probably the one that got me into being a root cause analysis expert is that I've worked quite a bit in process safety. So if you don't know what that is, personal safety kind of deals with a person getting injured, and in process safety, we're really focused on the potential for multiple fatalities, perhaps hurting somebody in the community, and to the point of maybe destroying our facility. So really kind of high impact events. And one of the elements of a good process safety management program is what we call incident investigation. And of course, the heart of an incident investigation is kind of the root cause analysis. Along with that, I've also had roles in kind of what was called operational stewardship, which was over the entire plant. So kind of factoring in not just that process safety viewpoint, but also quality incidents, customer complaints, community complaints, and kind of bringing that all into kind of one giant, I kind of called it a stew. And the COOD is conduct of operations and operational discipline, which root cause analysis can really help you kind of uncover issues that you're having in those areas. I'm also a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, which if anybody's familiar with that, problem-solving technique also relies quite a bit on root cause analysis. So I use similar tools, whether I'm investigating an incident or complaint or near miss, or also just in general problem solving. So a lot of times you can kind of find me going and run into the marker board with a bunch of Post-it notes in my hand going, come on team, we're gonna hash this out and try and find some good actions and learnings to take from whatever problem that we're seeing. So you can kind of see some of the companies I've worked for. Primarily my background is in chemical, but I've also done some biotech and food as well with Kellogg's and Novozymes. So I think we have a poll question to get started.
Absolutely. We're going to fire this up. Everybody get ready with your pointer fingers. What is your primary root cause analysis technique? We'll fire up that poll right now so you can answer those questions. You should see it on your screen at the moment. We'll give a few moments here to let everybody vote. This will be interesting, Sara. I'm actually very interested in seeing those results.
Yeah, so you might use multiple, but what's kind of the go-to, the one that most people in your plant are familiar with?
Yep. All right, we'll give another few more seconds here before we close out. All right, we hit 91%. Okay, here we go. I'm going to close the poll. Let's show those results. Look at that.
Great. Yeah, I was kind of expecting and working with most of the customers I've worked with are using 5Y. And especially as for simple investigations, the bulk of what you do, a lot of companies use 5Y. But it's great to see some Fishbone and cause mapping on there as well. We'll cover at least a little bit of fish mapping as we go here. So that's one of the things kind of going through this as I talk about things. And I'm going to have 5Y pitfalls here in an example, but this can fall into anything, or some of this can just kind of be your culture and you kind of fall into some of these pitfalls if you're using Fishbone or cause mapping as well. So one example I have here is a personal safety incident, but it's the first cold snap of the year. And Paulina came to work bright and early and noticed ice in the walkway. And she was going to take care of that hazard and put down some ice melt, but apparently none had been ordered yet for the year. At least it wasn't out by the door where she could put it down. Sara is not a morning person. She came to work in a rush, barely in time for her first meeting of the day, and slipped and fell on the ice. So one of the things that I find a lot is a potential pitfall is kind of the culture is, hey, we work in a dangerous place, kind of the shrug emoji here. What are you going to do, right? So an example of a 5Y that might fit into that culture is that, the event is I fell in the parking lot because there's ice in the walkway, because it was freezing last night. And I mean, it is December. What are you going to do, right? So that's kind of one thing. And obviously this is just ice, but you can see it in a lot of different aspects. Hey, the floor is always wet. Hey, this is always the case. It's just an unsafe environment. And some of this can be kind of a negative viewpoint of, hey, we can't get rid of all the hazards, right? So a lot of times if your 5Y looks like this, you don't really get to an action. What can I do here to help ensure this doesn't happen in the future, right? This is my 5Y. This is kind of, I'd say one pitfall is having kind of this mindset of, oh, wow, kind of shrug emoji, right? The next one is kind of blame the person, right? So one of the things that's really out there, especially in safety, but I think it applies, in our mindset to all types of things, including quality and production incidents as well, is there's kind of a statistic out there that over 80% of accidents are caused by behavior. And if you think about it, all events are caused by our choices and our behavior. What this sometimes misses, though, is our behavior is shaped by our environment and our work processes. So if you have a culture that's very likely to kind of blame the person, you're going to end up with a 5Y that might look like something like this. I fell in the parking lot because I wasn't paying attention. I was in a hurry because I was late for a meeting and I didn't leave home early enough. So an action here is going to be, hey, have a conversation with Sara, right? Have a one-on-one, or write me up, or something like that. Just Sara clearly, needs to set her alarm early in the morning so she's not rushing. She should know that she's in an area with ice. And this is a part of it, but probably not the whole story, right? So this is an example of taking this situation and making a cause map out of it. And for those of you familiar with cause mapping, obviously I've been helped with a lot of pretty pictures and not just post-it notes on each of these. But the thing I really like about cause mapping is it's essentially a 5Y. You just allow some branching to take place. So one of the key things is you start with the goal that's impacted. So me falling on the ice impacted the safety goal. And you can take time here to list all goals that are impacted. So in this case, it was probably just a safety goal, but sometimes you can have a safety event that then stops production and you're also impacting your production goal. And this helps us, especially when we're having very kind of compliance-driven events. As you know, sometimes it's tough to justify the cost of some of the improvements. But if you can start tying it to other costs as well, like production costs, that can help justify some of those improvements. So I'm starting with, our goal was impacted because I fell on the ice and I hurt myself. Why did I fall? Well, I fell because I wasn't paying attention and there was ice on the walkway. So why was there ice on the walkway? Well, it was cold temperatures and there was no ice melt, right? Because Paulina had seen it and wasn't able to take care of the situation. And if we kind of follow that line of thought of the no ice melt, we can end up with a place where, hey, we never remember to order the ice melt until it's too late, right? Maybe we can put a PM in place to remind us to order the ice melt in October. Or if it's not just to order it, hey, at least put it out by the doors so it's in place, right? So now we're somewhere where we've got some real actions we can take. And we could have an action to, yes, discuss this with Sara. She needs to pay more attention, especially in the winter, or it is a hazardous workplace and she needs to not be on her cell phone walking around. But we can also put something in place, like a PM to try and prevent this situation from happening again. So this is an example, really simple example of what's called a cause map. It's put out there by Think Reliability. And if you go to their website, they have a lot of free materials out there, templates and little quick videos where you can learn more about this technique if you're interested. They sell full training, but you can get a lot just kind of dabbing around their website. So this is one of the first things I kind of like. What I kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit is just some little tips and techniques that I think I apply as more of an expert root cause facilitator compared to some more basic root cause. And to me, this is the number one tool kind of in my toolbox, is using something like cause mapping because it helps me branch out. So although you could have a 5 why that goes, Sara fell on the ice, there's ice on the walkway, there's no ice melt. A lot of times because we lock ourselves into one path, we end up veering into the, hey, there's nothing we can do, or blame the person. A couple other things that I try and do is just to kind of reframe my thought process as I'm going in as a facilitator. So the first thing too is to assume positive intent, right? As we said, almost all incidents are caused by human behavior. And that person thought it was the right thing to do in the moment, usually, right? So again, I say it comes from process safety. Unfortunately, sometimes when we're investigating those incidents, the person is no longer there to answer for themselves. And we kind of have to go, hey, we don't think he went to work that day trying to kill himself. Why did he think this action was the right thing to do? And I've taken that not just in those large scale incidents, but also smaller incidents, right? So even when you are talking to the person and try and get past the blame of why did you do this, and try and think of, well, why did this make sense to you in the moment that this is what you should do? And when you do this and have this conversation, it will help you kind of get past that person into some of your broader opportunities, right? So a lot of times there's management system weaknesses that are encouraging some of this quote unquote bad behavior, right? So if we can understand why the person thought that was the right thing to do in the moment, or culturally in line, we can start trying to actually learn how to prevent that from happening. And you get kind of past this little symptom of the person doing the wrong thing and get to the root. Because if you just have a talk with Sara that doesn't address, Jim then doing the exact same thing tomorrow. Another thing that I use quite a bit and more mentally when I'm helping facilitate is kind of the Swiss cheese model of incidents. So I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, but what this is essentially each one of these pieces of Swiss cheese is a safeguard against an incident happening, right? It might be a daily check. It might be your swab analysis. It might be, we're doing behavior-based safety, fire extinguisher checks, right? We have all these different safeguards, but none of us are perfect. We're all human, and all of our safeguards have holes in them. And an accident happens when all of the holes line up. So a lot of times when you're investigating an accident, you'll just see, we had an opportunity to stop it, but there was a gap. We had an opportunity to stop it, and there was a gap. And one of the things we're trying to do when we do RCAs is close up some of these holes. So sometimes you'll find a hole that, hey, nothing went through. But you'll still kind of identify it in an RCA, it's an opportunity to work on that and improve that safeguard. Also, if you investigate near misses, you'll find, hey, the safeguard worked. It either prevented the incident from happening altogether or it really lessened the impact. And that's one thing that you also want to document and have a discussion with your teams is what went right? Because we want to make sure that we institutionalize those things that went right and also kind of reinforce it, because we did have a challenge to that safety system or that safeguard system. So we want to kind of document that. And again, I really think sometimes the cause mapping helps me see some of those things that went right. So I have an example of an incident. A facility I was working with, there was a chemical release. It happened during the day when the supervisors were on staff. At this facility, supervisors didn't work 24/7. And they jumped in and handled the incident and took care of it really before there were many impacts at all. But when we were looking through that incident investigation, we kind of had to look at ourselves and go, well, they're only here, 25% of the time, they're day staff. If it had happened on another time, some of the other 75% of the time, would we have had as good of a response, right? And treat that incident investigation almost as if it had happened on the off shift. So some of what we documented was all of the things that the supervisors did right to make sure that that information then was passed on to the off shifts, and to see if we could institutionalize some of that information. So a lot of times you don't want to go, what if, literally to death and assume everything can lead to fatality. But sometimes you do need to be reasonable of, hey, did we just luck out that this safeguard was working? Or was this safeguard, intentional? We relied on it and it did work on purpose as intended. And another kind of quick thing I like to do at the end of the root cause analysis is to, do kind of a gut check. So we've done the 5 why, we've done the cause map, we've ended up with some incidents. If we look at the recommendations on the list of recommendations, kind of project out in the future, okay, we've done these recommendations. Do we actually think this will prevent this event from happening again or lessen the event from happening again? And sometimes that's a really good way to kind of make sure you're on the right track of not just addressing some of the symptoms, but actually getting far enough to get to something that's a little bit deeper and more towards that root cause. Another thing I have on here, kind of along those lines, but I didn't put a bullet, is making sure the right people are in the room, right? So make sure you have an entire team doing these root cause events or incident investigations. You want those the people that were involved to participate so they can talk to you, what were they thinking? But you also want a facilitator and some other people that were not involved kind of outside of it with some distance to be able to talk to the events as well. So I have another example of an incident investigation. It was potentially a runaway reaction situation, right? That could be really bad. And luckily, the personnel were kind of on top of it and stopped it before it went bad, but it was a pretty significant near miss. The next morning, when the day staff got there, operations manager, a bunch of the engineers got in a room. They did a root cause without having the actual participants involved, and they ended up with a laundry list of, I don't know, 20 or 30 action items to prevent this, right? A couple hours later, the personnel that were involved came in and kind of demanded another root cause analysis where they participated, because that's what they were accustomed to, right? Doing a pretty detailed cause map together as a team. So kind of got them in the room and we talked through those issues. And again, some of what came up was what went right. That those participants had been in a similar event several years earlier. They had seen it coming. They stationed somebody kind of in the right place to be able to stop the event if things got out of control, right? So some of that too was a discussion, hey, what if it was a different shift? But then the other thing was, this had happened to them a couple of years ago, and they had been thinking about it and ways to prevent it. And they had a nice, very simple step that we could take that would prevent it from ever happening again, right? So instead of that big laundry list of 20 or 30 things that management team will struggle to get done and probably never complete fully, right? They had one nice kind of elegant answer. And so some of that is you need to get that entire team together to kind of see both sides, right? Because they had not thought of probably a lot of things on that larger list. But the engineering team also had not thought of the simple thing that the maintenance team had considered. So it's really good to kind of get the entire team together and talking. Again, what went right and what went wrong to try and help along those lines. So some of these are just kind of specific techniques. It's just kind of reframing your thinking as you go in as a facilitator. I went through that pretty quick, but I think Jim already has several questions for me.
Yes, of course. This is great. No, I appreciate it. I took a bunch of notes here too. We did get some questions prior to the webinar from those that had submitted, and we thank you for that. So we'll just dive right in because a lot of the questions that we did receive prior to this kind of all rolled up to the same three questions here. What is the most prevalent oversight you typically see when it comes to root cause analysis? What's the big roadblock that seems to break down when driving to that root cause?
I think for me, it's kind of what I alluded to at the beginning, that a lot of times teams will just kind of blame the person, and then you can't get kind of past that and past the person defined where there's management system breakdowns and things that leadership are doing that are affecting line workers' thought processes. So sometimes it's really uncomfortable as a leader because the finger's kind of turning around and pointing back at us. But a lot of times, that's where I find teams are most effective and you have the highest trust built as well, right? If the people involved in the event know that, hey, we are going to talk about our decision making and there is some blame to go around in our decision making, but that we'll continue to go past and try and understand why we made the decision that way. So it's not just Sara did something, like quote unquote dumb, but that, I had reasons for thinking that was the right thing. And looking at it, that really helps kind of drive past some of those issues. That's one of the biggest things I find with teams is when they just blame a person. Yeah, you write that person up. They're probably not going to participate well in the next root cause analysis where they have valuable things you can learn from. You might even do something like, fire them or they leave and the next person's in their place and they do the exact same thing again. So you really haven't solved the problem. I think that's kind of the biggest stumbling block I see with cultures and teams.
Yeah, exactly. You brought up culture earlier, and it sounds like that is the we'll say overarching umbrella to a lot of this is that if and you brought it up too, you should have people that are outside of the incident kind of looking into these things and finding out the what worked and what didn't work. And if you are saying most organizations are kind of just pointing fingers at people, say, you weren't paying attention, even though you know it's cold outside, you should be looking around and instead of on your phone looking at cat videos. No offense, Sarah, I know you weren't looking at cat videos when you slipped and fell, um, but yeah, it happens. And I think, yeah, it's the faster thing to just say, it's your fault, instead of taking the time and going through the motions and really trying to find out, okay, maybe there's something bigger here that we hadn't discussed. Who in your experience do you generally see working on root cause analysis? Like you mentioned, there's different folks part of the incident, outside of the incident. Is there like we'll just say a formal committee that should be created around this? And who do you recommend sit in on that committee?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to have a multi-layered approach. So to have in a procedure, think through it, but that you have certain incidents that are, smaller, simple incidents, and you trust a broader group um, of investigators to investigate. So maybe, all the supervisors are trained in 5Y and they're able to do, the simple kind of near misses and incidents. And then that you have a team of at least one or two people that have, kind of higher training, either actually go to class or just, there's a lot of things you can do to kind of research online and, watch, unfortunately, watch incident investigation videos of, professionals, and you can learn a lot through that. But a higher team that kind of jumps in when either it's a high impact event or even, like I said, sometimes there's near misses, but they were a near miss just because something went really right. And there's still a lot of kind of, I call it meat on the bone to go after and learn from. So a lot of times, I recommend having a procedure where you do scale those. Hey, this impact is, small simplified investigation. These impacts require a more in-depth investigation, specify who needs to be on the teams. Maybe the simple is just a supervisor and one or two people involved. In the more depth, you're really getting a team of maybe, 4 to up to 10 people in the room to work through. But also give the flexibility to that, that kind of advanced team where they can jump in even on a simple one and go, hey, I want to take this. Another thing I've seen is it's good, especially in the EHS realm and the personal safety realm, is if you do have safety committees, maybe you have a safety committee that takes a look a little bit at the results of the investigations or trends of the incidents. So that's one thing we also have to do in process safety is we investigate each incident on its own merits, but then you also periodically take a look at your trends. Are we having the same incident over and over? And taking a look at, well, maybe we're not getting to the right thing in the individual incidents, or the individual incident investigation is only seeing a piece of it. And if we take a step back and we look at them a little bit more of a whole, we might see a pattern. So I think it's good to kind of have that additional layer, whether it's a safety committee or other process built in to kind of look at your trends overall as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you mentioned, I think the earlier slide just before this, a lot of times folks wind up with a laundry list of things to do and don't necessarily come up with that elegant answer to address the issues or proactively address similar issues in the future. Why do you think that is? Is it because you have so many people voicing opinions in a committee, or there's not a process in place where you say, okay, look, we got a lot of great ideas, sticking up here on the board. Let's see if we can condense that down into more, we'll just say, simpler terms, but make it obviously crisp and actionable.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Sometimes it's the personalities of who's involved, but a lot of times it goes to, your facilitator as well. When I facilitate, I really try to get to only one or two things that will really have high impact, right? So that might be, in the 5 why or a cause that kind of going deeper. And going past some of the smaller, easier things to do, but maybe we walk away with one or two that are tougher to execute, but will have a high impact. I guess my fear sometimes with those big laundry lists are, yeah, it might be 20 or 30 small things to do, but it's just difficult to get them all done and to track. And a lot of times they were probably only addressing some symptoms. And so you'll have, it's kind of like building the better mousetrap, right? You'll still have somebody kind of challenge it a little bit different angle, and you didn't really get to what that root was to address. So I think it's valuable to try and get to kind of one of those one or two really high impact ones that you really can see through and know that got done. And I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this too when you have those big laundry lists and you need to make sure they all get done, especially before an audit. It just, you end up spending a lot of time managing these lists, and it's tough because they might not be the thing that stops it. So again, kind of that question at the end of, hey, if we execute these, will it not happen again, sometimes helps clean that up. It's not that they're not good things to go do, but sometimes you don't want the extra attention that you need to pay to ones that will prevent, especially a compliance event.
Right. That's actually great segue into the next question, which is around why is there so much difficulty justifying a cost or the effort to make improvement, in your opinion, for these compliance-driven events?
Yeah, sometimes I think it's kind of, unfortunately, the frequency of events. So it could be a really, really high cost event, right? You have a large scale recall. I just saw an auto manufacturer that's telling people they can't park in their garage, right? Can't remember who that is today. But that's going to be a really high cost, recall, both from fixing the incident and a brand image concern, right? But that doesn't happen kind of typically every year. So you don't have a budget line item for it. So while people recognize, oh yeah, this could be a really high cost thing, or for me in process safety, we talk about blowing up the plant, destroying the plant. That's a high cost event, but the frequency is likely so low, and because you don't constantly realize this cost, I think it's really difficult then to fight for a budget line item for corrective action or improvement activity to prevent it. I think the other thing is, again, when we're kind of in the blame of the person thing, it's easy to kind of, especially from a leadership team, to kind of go, well, they should just be better, right? And I shouldn't have to invest costs to improve behavior. So that can be a really difficult thing. So if you can turn some of these, we do realize costs every time we have an incident. And so sometimes if you can just be a lot more aggressive about trying to document that and show where that is. And some of it might be, your time as an administrator administering all of the tracking of events and action items and that type of thing. There is a cost to that. Getting a team of 4 to 6 people together in a room has a cost to it. Unfortunately, I was a witness to a really significant safety event. Part of the root of that was somebody took a risk to improve production, but production was shut down for quite a bit of time to clean up from the safety event, right? So there was a cost to that. It wasn't just the human cost and the workman's comp cost, but there was also a deep production cost. So I think some of it's just trying to game the system a little bit I think most people do care about compliance things, but it's still just difficult to make it a budget line item.
Mm, it's so true. Oh, that'll never happen to us. Yeah. Okay. So, this again just ties into the behavior and the cultural element. And you're right. I mean, again, it's simple to point the blame at a person and say you weren't paying attention or, oh, you didn't do the process right or something like that. How do you actually break that culture, that bad negative culture? How do you make sure that um, everybody within the organization is kind of seeing things from a different light in terms of like, hey, it's not always the person's fault. There's other elements at play here. Let's discuss and talk about it. It seems like you brought up earlier, that's the biggest struggle where people just look, they've got the blinders on. It was your fault. Either fix it next time or you're out of here or you get a write up or something like that. How do you break that culture?
It can be really challenging to do. I know coming from chemical, it can be a little bit easier because the United States has something called the Chemical Safety Board that investigates some of these really bad incidents, and they put out videos of their investigations, which one is great learning tool for me as a facilitator. But they are very good at kind of getting to the person and then moving past it. So I think, watching some of those videos, again, helps me as a facilitator, but can also help me with some, leadership teams where I'll kind of take some of the videos they're particularly good at that, make sure the leadership team sees it. Some of it's just kind of continually trying to push for that as a facilitator and have members of leadership, in the root cause investigation. And trying to get to that thought process and why did you think that? Because, a lot of times that will then point to, well, you asked me to do this checklist over here. Or, and sometimes we don't realize some of the things we're asking them to do are actually creating some incentives to do other behaviors that we don't want.
Right.
So a lot of it's just trying to build that trust with the employees that they'll open up in an investigation. I will say a lot of times I've had to fight with leadership that, hey, nobody is going to get written up here, right? To try and get them to open up. And so the employees are more free to talk and you can get that conversation going. And I think just kind of over time, then the leadership team starts to realize the part that they play. And again, on their side too, it's not that they're consciously encouraging bad behavior, right? Sometimes we just don't realize some of the things that we're asking people to do end up incentivizing. One really big example I had the plant manager kind of realize was, he would congratulate people for, getting the line going again. But he didn't know if they were getting the line going again by being safe. You can get the line going again by taking some shortcuts faster. And he started to realize, hey, I was incentivizing people to take shortcuts with safety to get the line going again. So even though they were saying, hey, safety is number one, who was getting the blue ribbons, we all knew were people that were taking shortcuts. So, that was one thing when he finally realized that, he was like, I'm never giving anybody, kind of a pat in the back till I've seen them do it. But, that's kind of one of those areas where we think we're doing a good thing. We're celebrating success. But what you don't know is kind of what went behind that.
Would you see this almost like maybe additional KPI, right? To solve any problem, you always have to put the lens of safety over everything you do. Is that something that you see happening or is addressed in some of that cultural shift learning?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's one culture, right? It's not that employees go in, hey, we've got a strong production culture, so I'm going to do all the right things for production today, but we don't have a good safety culture, so I'm not going to do all the right things for safety. You have one culture. And, I think if you do kind of keep that lens of looking for kind of what I call negative reinforcements out there, then you'll see sometimes where your programs conflict. But it takes practice to see where some of those negative reinforcements are and to always be looking for them. But, while we say, hey, you can't improve anything you don't measure, and that drives us to have a lot of KPIs, almost every KPI, if that's the number one thing, will also lead to some undesired effects as well. So it's just something we always have to be careful with as leadership when we set these KPIs, is keeping them balanced. It's not the number one thing. It's either having a range of KPIs or just, being careful as you're out there watching the execution to deliver the KPIs, that it's not, we're not encouraging, and I don't just want to say unsafe, but, non-compliant behaviors, because it could also be quality.
Right, right. So going back to our poll question, right, we saw a lot of folks, about 60% said they prefer or they primarily use the 5 why method. And later on in the presentation, you said, the number one tool, at least that you use, is cause mapping. Can you build out a case for why cause mapping technique is maybe a better option over something like 5 why?
Yeah, I think what I like about cause mapping is it's so similar to 5 why, right? So I think, you could have a simple cause map that is a linear, like 5 why. One of the things I saw that where I really jumped kind of on the cause map bandwagon initially was in kind of customer complaints. We were having trouble with repeat complaints, and we just kind of weren't getting to able to get to the right root cause. And I think what helped me was Think Reliability has a video about the Hubble telescope. And if people remember, when we first kind of launched the Hubble telescope, we had blurry images. Something was, got out of alignment or something, when we put it up into space. And you could sit there and you could go, oh, well, we need to fix what's out of alignment. But really kind of what they ended up doing was I don't know the technical terms, but essentially they misaligned some of the things that were right to then sync up with the things that was not in alignment, right? So they broke something that was right. In doing kind of the cause map example, you could kind of see, oh, because I had that branching, I could go, well, I'm not just focused exactly on what's wrong, right? I'm kind of seeing a bigger picture. And so I think that's kind of where I was like, oh, not being so kind of locked into the why, could maybe help you see things from additional angles and find additional places to improve. And like I said, I think it also makes it easier to document some of the things that went right, which are, also important lines of discussion. So that's kind of where I jumped on it, that I think it's, almost the exact same skill set as a 5 why, but it gives you a little bit more freedom to kind of do those branching kind of with the ands or the ors.
Yep, goes that extra mile. So I've got one, oh, just one came in. Have you used cause mapping and Fishbone in combination?
I personally tend to use Fishbone a little bit more when I'm doing more like project work, like Six Sigma project work. I think of it a little bit more to kind of help the team brainstorm, because you're doing some of those categories. I did work for a company that used the Fishbone quite heavily for a while. And to be honest, like anything, everything's good, right? To a point. And I think they had been doing it so long, they kind of got locked into finding not the wrong thing, but the same thing wrong all the time. And I kind of came in at the end of that cycle. So I've rebelled against the Fishbone probably a little bit more than it's valid to. But I do think it's really good for helping, especially as an administrator. It does help you categorize and trend a little bit more. One thing with cause mapping, I think it really helps you develop the actions, but it can be more challenging to do overall trends. So a lot of times, as a facilitator, I'll kind of go, okay, I'm going to slap the name of something like a Fishbone type thing on here to help facilitate some of that data trending.
Great, thank you. We're going to shut it down, but I appreciate every question that had come in. I want to thank Sara. Thank you so much for helping us understand this a little bit better. And again, giving us those great examples, because that definitely helps me learn more about how this stuff works. And it puts a lot of this into context. And also thank you to everybody who attended today's session. And again, the questions were great. Keep them coming. If you have more questions, we're here to help. Safetychain.com is where you can find some more information about overall just meeting compliance, operational efficiencies. We have a lot of thought leadership content here. Sara, we hope you come back and talk to us a little bit more about root cause analysis, EH&S. We appreciate you and we love having you on today. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We hope to see you back on Beyond Compliance real soon.
Thank you.